Welcome to Reframed, the podcast about disability in media. In this series, we shine a light on how people with disability are represented on our screens. Why is this important? Because authentic representation matters. Media is powerful, and more often than not, they get it very, very wrong. My name is Jason Clymo, and I'll be your host. Join me, my co-host, and a wonderful selection of guests as we review, analyse, and score disability representation in TV and film. So welcome to episode 1 of Reframed podcast, the podcast about disability in media. Primarily, we'll be focusing on the representation of people with disability in TV and film. This podcast series has been put together and is funded by Attitude Foundation. If you don't know much about Attitude Foundation, you should definitely look them up. They're an amazing organisation that tackles all things about the representation of people with disability in mainstream media. And I guess for me, my personal connection is I am a person with disability and I work in this space a lot, and I'm incredibly passionate about representation of people with disability because I feel like it informs the unconscious biases that we all hold for disability and for and about people with disability as well. So, you hopefully when you follow along with this, you get a greater understanding of why representation is so important. Because I think before I came into this world, I was like, why does it really matter how people are shown or portrayed on TV and film? I didn't really have that great understanding. So I guess our mission here in this series is to teach you why that matters, to teach you about the power that our creative industries have, and also to teach you about how damaging it is that people with disability are either excluded or just misrepresented in these industries in general. So the idea is we're going to also have a bit of fun. It's not going to be totally negative the whole time, I hope. I've got two amazing co-hosts that join me each week, which I'll introduce in a minute. Each episode of this series will also discuss one TV show and one film, just so we can kind of dabble in a bit of both. And there'll be lots to do with like Netflix and Stan and things like that, and we'll be criticising a fair bit, I imagine. Everything from like really big budget Hollywood films to like something a bit smaller that's been, Aussie made, which I think is also very important because it shows that no matter how big the scale of your production, you should be inclusive of people with disability and representing correctly. And we'll also on each episode have an amazing guest. So we'll have our special guest. We've got some really cool people like Jason McCurry, Naz Campanella, and I won't give away too much, but just to get you excited and to keep coming back each time. But for now, let me just introduce very warmly my two amazing co-hosts, Steph Dower and Robyn Lambird. Did you want to say hello?
Hey, how you going?
Really good. Thank you so much for joining me. What's been going on? What's news? Are you excited to get cracking?
Yeah, can't wait for it. It's going to be great.
I'm excited.
It's going to be great having conversations, yeah.
Yeah, get analysing these different pieces of media. So to help you all at home get to know us a bit better, we've actually prepared some questions for each other. Nothing too juicy, I don't think, or personal, but I'm not sure what my questions are, so we'll find out. Why don't we start with Robyn? First of all, did you just want to introduce yourself, Robyn, and tell us a bit about what you do and your career to date?
Yeah, sure. My name's Robyn Lambird. I am a person with disability. I was born with cerebral palsy. So again, I'm just super passionate about how people with disabilities are represented within our society because, I think that leads on to a lot of other things like, job opportunities and education and all those big things that we sort of look at as a minority group. I've kind of got my eggs in a few different baskets. I'm an athlete, also do a lot of content creation around sort of telling authentic stories of disability and sort of sharing my own experience to mentor other young people. Just stoked to be involved with this podcast and to really delve into, what representation means to people with disabilities.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, a very busy person, so we feel grateful to have a superstar like you join us.
Robyn, I've got a question. I guess when you were growing up as someone with a disability, were there any TV shows or films that you found positive role models in, or was it sort of rare to come across that?
Yeah, I think I've always been pretty aware that that sort of space for people with disabilities in the media was pretty lacking. I don't think I ever
Mm,
really remember seeing someone like me represented on TV. I think obviously you have sort of like your X-Men, like was it Charles Xavier? I think that was like the first time I really noticed someone like in a
yes,
wheelchair in a movie.
literally.
Yeah.
But obviously, I mean, he was like a superhero, so not all that relatable to myself. Um, and I think things are changing. I think more and more we're sort of starting to notice that there's, characters with disabilities and people, that have like CP, for instance, in TV shows. That's really exciting.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I
Very
think
cool.
you're a little bit of a superhero, to be honest, in
Oh,
my view.
stop.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess we'll be talking about, different characters. And I think we've got a good cross section in the different sort of media that we're going to be analysing as well. In terms of like, if people are following along and they are, possibly like kids, like looking for those role models, I think maybe we'll introduce something exciting into their life where they can find that role model. So like, we don't
Yeah.
just analyse the things like X-Men. We have some relatable characters as well. So that's exciting for me. I think I'd really like to know from you though, are there any kind of common tropes that you've noticed when people with disability are represented in TV and film?
Definitely. I think there's like sort of two major ones. It's either, people with disabilities are used as this sort of narrative tool to draw like inspiration. So they've like sort of, like
Mm.
heroically overcome their disability to achieve something. Or it's kind of this like whole narrative of, well, you'd be better off dead. And I don't really know which one is worse because, for a
Yeah.
majority of people, like our disability is just part of who we are. And it doesn't make
Yeah.
us inspiring. The things that we do, if anything, make us inspiring. And, for a lot of people, they're able to live like pretty, ordinary or even, extraordinary lives with their disabilities. So
Yeah.
certainly not better off dead. But yeah, so sort of like either the victim or, the sort of the hero because they've sort of overcome as the two main ones I think I've
Mm.
noticed. And also, using disability as a signifier of like being a villain as well, like especially with sort of the
Yeah.
more visible disabilities. So I'm really just looking forward to sort of delving in this podcast into people who just incidentally have a disability, and the character isn't really revolving around that.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think especially with like the villain character, a lot of the time it's people that have, like you said, that like visible disability or like some sort of facial difference as well. And that is just such a harmful trope because
Mm,
from like kids, you can see as soon as they're there's so many horror stories of people, especially with facial difference, where like kids will just start crying because they've seen someone with facial difference, and then the parent might be like, "Why are you crying?" And they're like, "Oh, because they look like this person." Like, yeah, like a
yeah.
villain in a Disney movie or something that they've seen, and it's like that's
I
so
mean, wasn't there a film
harmful.
recently called The Witches and they had
Yeah,
limb differences? You just like, really? Come on.
I
Like,
know. I know. It's
Should
like,
have been past
how
that
are
by
we
now.
still going through this? Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
surely we've got to the point where we can do better. And that's like, I guess the point of this whole thing is some things are quite good, and we will talk about the good stuff as well, like I said, not just the negatives, but there's still so far to go. Like, we still need to have these conversations, which sucks because I wish that we didn't have to have these conversations. But we do. I mean, I'm enjoying what we're doing here, but I wish that we could talk about, like, I wish that we were just already into the future where we didn't have to talk about this and educate people all the time.
yeah.
Anyway, just quickly before we jump into asking Steph some questions, Robyn, just tell people where they can find you on Instagram, whatever it is.
Yeah, Instagram's sort of the main one for me. It's where all of my sort of content is housed. So yeah, just Robyn Lambird at Instagram would be a great place to find me.
Perfect. All right. Hopefully you get an influx of followers or something. All right, Steph, now on to you. Did you want to just introduce
Yeah.
yourself, tell us a bit about what you do, that kind of jazz?
Yeah. So yeah, really excited to be on the podcast with you both and really excited to chat to the amazing guests we've got coming on. But about me, I work as a filmmaker myself. So this is going to be some interesting conversations to have you know, critiquing and analyzing other people's work when I'm trying to get my own work going. So, but I run my own production company at the moment, Dower Productions, and I'm really interested in diverse and inclusive stories. I mean, that's what we're all here for. That's what we want to see. We want to see ourselves reflected on TV because, like Robyn, I did not see myself reflected on screen as I was growing up. I use a motorized wheelchair for mobility. I like to think that I have a very full life. I am a very social person. I love to travel. I try to be a positive person. And the stuff that I saw on TV or in film about people that use wheelchairs was so negative and so sad and depressing. And I remember literally seeing a character one day on screen and thinking, oh, that life must be so sad. Oh, that I would hate that. And then literally like 10 seconds later, I was like, wait, that is kind of my life, but it's just not portrayed in the way that I think about my life. So it was such a weird meta moment kind of thing. But like Robyn, I also have a few eggs in different baskets. I also work as a disability consultant and a disability advocate at different times. So just, I guess, trying our best to change the narrative, literally, and to, you know, show the wider population that people with disabilities are literally people. We're not some mythical made-up creatures somewhere. We're literally just people living our lives just like anyone else. So yeah.
About 20% of the population, people. Like, we're not unicorns.
Exactly. Being a filmmaker, you obviously probably have a pretty keen eye for sort of critiquing film and television yourself. Have you seen anything that has sort of changed that narrative recently that, you know, you think is a great representation of people with disabilities, Steph?
I think this is a really exciting time in the psyche of, you know, film and TV production, because we are starting to have more diverse voices on screen. I think that's partly due to social media giving people more voices and things becoming more accessible to people. So in recent years, I have been very grateful to see some progress in this area. A few ones that stick out for me is The Peanut Butter Falcon. I thought that was a great indie film that came out of America last year sometime. Stars a young man with Down syndrome. And another one that I really enjoyed was a sitcom also coming out of America called Speechless, where it was just a family sitcom. It was really funny, great family dynamics, but the main character and actor was a young man with cerebral palsy. So just, I don't know, just shows like that and films like that, I really felt that authenticity coming through. And that to me just adds more layers to the story. And I think audiences nowadays are really smart. So we can see when people are sort of faking it or lying to us. So I think, you know, producers are having to be more aware of how to make things authentic. And of course, the best way to do that is to get people with lived experience involved in the production, whether they're the actors, the writers, producers, directors, crew members, anyone. So I think, as I said, it's a really exciting time. And I hope we see more of these kinds of portrayals going forward.
Definitely. Exactly what you've just said. And like, you know, we're getting smarter, but also we can look shit up. Like, everything's on Google.
Yeah,
and like
exactly.
Someone's probably written a blog or an article that like I'll find the answer to. So I think that you're like our resident researcher, Steph, because I feel like anytime I ask you about anything to do with like, well, obviously because you work in the industry, but I feel like I like talk to you about a film or a TV and you're like, I read the book and it was different because of this. And I'm like, you are amazing. How do you have so much time? I swear, do you sleep? Because you're such a busy person, but I swear you always know like 10 times more than me. So that's why I'm really happy to have you on. and given that you do...
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're like my expert. Given that you do work in that industry, I really wanted to get your insight and to sort of educate people who are following along as well. about what the main barriers probably are in that industry, like you said, like in front of and behind the camera, for people with disability to be employed in like film and TV. So what do you think those are?
From the barrier that I have come across 100% is the stigma of disability still. And I think that, it's like a catch-22. Like, we need to have more positive portrayals and more authentic portrayals of people with disabilities on screen. But to do that, we need to get more people with disabilities behind the scenes as well. So it's kind of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. But absolutely, it's the stigma. People, yeah, both. Just go with both. But it's definitely people looking at me like I have a physical disability, and so people look at me and they make assumptions about what I can and can't do, and that's based on what they've seen or what they've been exposed to previously in popular media and things like that. So that's the reason that I am doing what I do. It's the reason that I want to tell stories that show disability and people of diverse backgrounds in different lights to try and change and remove that stigma as much as possible and have society see us for who we are, not who we were portrayed to be in historical settings.
Wow, could not have said it better myself. That was amazing. You just really smashed that home there. So happy to have you. And just quickly, before you two get to jump in and grill me, where can people find you, Steph, follow you, and maybe employ you for different things because you do freelance? So.
Yep. So I have a website, dowerproductions.com, DOWER. That's probably the best place to go for me. I do have Instagram as well, which is just steph.dower11. So feel free to check me out and send me a message if you'd like to have a chat. And yeah, I'm always keen to collaborate and co-design with people. So yeah.
Exciting. Well, I guess it's my turn.
So Jason, can we ask you some questions now?
Is that her?
Yes.
Get to it.
So do you wanna start with telling us about yourself, introducing yourself?
Yeah. So hi, I'm Jason. This feels like a dating thing. I feel like you two are so natural that I'm like, No, I'm Jason. I'm 25 years old, and my experience is in tourism and marketing. I studied medicine for 2 years, which was kind of random and didn't love that, and then jumped over into marketing and tourism. And then from there, just sort of got a bit more passionate about disability and representation. I am a model, so I think that's where that all kind of started from for me in terms of where we are now talking about representation in TV and film. Is in the fashion industry, things are moving, and what I find really interesting is it's moving in a really like kind of tokenistic fad type way, I guess. Like I feel like we see a lot of models that are like manual wheelchair users, but I very rarely see people with disability, modelling that are power wheelchair users or like quadriplegic or something. And it's that to me just screams tokenism. So for me, I'm trying to battle from the inside as a model and trying to also get a little bit more work behind the scenes, like assisting with like, creative direction of photo shoots or of a campaign. So sort of trying to move in that direction so we have more power over the narrative as well. So I'm also now here doing cool stuff with the both
Amazing.
of you, and I'm excited.
Being a superstar producer.
And hosting a podcast. Look at me go. No, I'm very, very grateful to Attitude Foundation for having me on and obviously letting me have two co-hosts that are incredible by my side. So that's where I'm at, and I'm excited to get into this with the two of you.
We're so excited to get into it with you too. And I mean, your passion for sort of promoting diversity and inclusion within, the media, within fashion, beauty, everything, it really sort of shines through. And I was just wondering, we know you have an acquired disability, so you might have a little bit more experience, I guess, with the perspectives of the non-disabled community than, say, myself and Steph. How much do you think the current lack of authentic representation impacts the formation of ableism, I guess, both, internally and externally within the wider community?
Massively. Like, in a short answer, it basically informs, like, I would say, everything. So our creative industries, whether you realise it or not, the advertising you see on TV, the show that you're watching, the movie you go to see, even the music you listen to, all that stuff informs you subconsciously as well as consciously about stuff. So, of course, like, about everything. So, of course, it also informs about disability and people with disability. So, and that people with disability aren't immune to ableism either, as in, like, I have internalized ableism as well as externalized ableism. So, like, I'll accidentally be ableist towards someone else, and it happens. And, like, I'm someone who I would like to say I'm quite conscious about my biases, and I want to unpack that. So you can only imagine that, like, people who aren't really ready to start unpacking that or even know about unconscious biases or about how our industries like that inform our mindsets and perceptions of things. You can only imagine, like, how far they've got to go.
I think that really comes from people with disabilities being lumped into a group together, and it's such a diverse minority. Well, minority is probably maybe not the right word, but I don't have the experience of yourself, Jason, who is has an acquired disability, who is a paraplegic, just as you don't know the experience of someone who is vision impaired or hearing impaired. Like, I think, so that's where we can easily fall into the same traps as other people. But I think maybe what we're more conscious of is checking ourselves, perhaps.
Yeah. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, Steph.
Perfect. Good advice. So I guess, Jason, in a dream scenario where you've created your own movie or TV series, what does the ideal representation of disability look like in your eyes?
Well, people might get a little bit of a snapshot of that throughout this series, because I've got a bit of control over who I can and can't invite on here, so that's quite good. But just, like you've pointed out already, each person with disability has different experiences, different viewpoints, different upbringings, all that kind of thing. And then there's intersectionality as well, where two different marginalisations will cross over and there'll be interaction between those within the one individual. And so there's so much to, I guess, consider and represent. But the easiest way to do that is just keep inviting more marginalised communities in. And so that's exactly what I would do. I would just do my absolute best to make sure that everyone feels represented, that everything is as inclusive as possible. And the best way to do that is to just bring them in front of and behind of the camera or whatever you're working on. So that would 100% be what I would do. Yeah.
I love it. An ideal world.
I know. Give me all the power and control.
We need someone to check Jason's stat.
Yeah, maybe, Power check, quick.
Love it. No. Well, that was really good. And I think people will get a good understanding of who we are, what we're doing, what we've been doing, and what we hope to do as well on this. And I think now it's time to stop talking about ourselves, like we're not that interesting, and just get straight into our first ever media analysis, which is on, we picked a good one, the Netflix series called Special by Ryan O'Connor. So let's get straight into it. Special is a comedy series on Netflix. It's a Netflix original that's got commissioned for short 15-minute episodes. It was created and stars a person with disability, a queer man named Ryan O'Connor. It's a very interesting series because it's the first that I've noticed that has that intersectionality of being queer and disabled as well. The series follows Ryan as he goes through some honest, real experiences coming out of the disabled closet and learning about ableism and internalised ableism. You can watch it on Netflix, and we are excited to review it. So there we go. There's Special. Very interesting TV series indeed, and I think quite good. Steph, what were your main thoughts about Special?
I think I was really excited when Special was announced and came onto Netflix, because it's not very often, as we've all kind of pointed out already, that you get a person with a disability having control over their own show, producing it, writing it, starring in it. So Ryan was kind of like ticking all the boxes, which is amazing. And it felt really, because it was based on his own memoir, his own book, you felt that authenticity. And I think what I really liked about it was, I think I got some things out of it that perhaps I felt maybe ashamed, maybe the wrong word, but like I didn't want to tell people about, or I didn't want to talk about. It's like it is that internalized ableism, and you know, trying to, I guess, blend in, because that's what we've kind of always been taught to do, is just like do your best to blend in with the crowd and to, you know, not be too disabled kind of thing. So I think I really liked watching Ryan's journey, sort of, I guess, navigating his new life and taking those steps to reinvent himself and I guess slowly become more comfortable with who he is, because I think that's a journey that we all go through, and not even just people with disabilities, but we all do that. You know, that's what 20s are for, right? But yeah, so I think for me that really came across quite strong. It was a different perspective that I haven't really seen before, so that was interesting.
Yeah, cool. And Robyn, I'm very interested, obviously, to hear what you think about this, because I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think you would relate quite a lot.
Yeah, no, I loved this show. I think for me, it was the first time that I'd really seen cerebral palsy reflected in a way that I could completely relate to, and felt very authentic to my own experience. You know, even, you know, tackling that, like Steph said, tackling that internalized ableism in that way, sort of coming out as being disabled, was a really interesting, you know, way to put it. And yeah, just like even from the small things, like the relationship with his mum, you know, it felt pretty similar to what I've experienced in my own life. A little bit of codependency happening there. And just, like the way that he sort of managed to sort of reflect the humor as well. I think that comes with living with a disability. You know, we find ourselves in some pretty funny situations sometimes, and I don't think it's wrong to sort of laugh at that, or to, you know, to sort of exploit that for comedic value.
Literally.
So,
absolutely. As long as we're the one doing the exploiting, it's all good.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that so much. But you're totally on the money, and I think as well, Steph, like I felt the biggest thing for me was that Ryan was representing himself essentially, but the character Ryan was a person with disability that was so real. Like he was layered and flawed, like wasn't this perfect one-dimensional or even just like two-dimensional. Like it was like we got to see like all of the different things interacting, and like the intersectionality was obviously amazing as well, like being a queer person as well as being a person with disability. Like that intersection is so important, especially for me, because like I personally relate to that, and I have literally never seen that before. So that was a big moment for me. Was there anything, because I've got some stuff where I'm kind of like, I'm not sure if that was great. Like, was there anything that you two probably would have taken points off on your score for Special?
There were certain things that I think, you know, if they were to happen within, you know, our everyday life, they would have been seen as, you know, a little bit problematic. But I also think they were reflective of real experiences. So, you know, like we said, like Ryan's own internalized ableism, where he's sort of like, you know, I think he sees another character at one point and is like, oh, I'd love to be like that disabled. That must be so much easier.
Oh my God, that's one of the opening scenes. It's fucked up.
Yeah, which I mean, isn't a great thing to say, but, you know, as myself, you know, being sort of like an ambulatory wheelchair user, I have sort of felt a little bit stuck in the middle sometimes, where I'm like not able-bodied enough to keep up with my able-bodied friends, but also like my disabled friends seem to have things a lot more figured out because they've had a bit more experience, perhaps.
But I think it's also sectors. Like the ableism you experience as well. Like it's almost like I feel like you would probably experience so many more microaggressions because it's not so like blatantly obvious as Steph and I with our wheelchairs. Like, and that's bullshit in itself. Like,
so I think it was a tricky one in that sense, because like, there were certain things where I was like, ooh, but then I was like, well, wait a minute, you know, has been my experience, and is that something that we need to unpack? And I'll be interested to see sort of when they go into a second season, when the episodes I think are going to be a little bit longer, just sort of where they take that and whether, that sort of is able to be looked into a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think that was my thing, because as we should probably point out, the episodes in season 1 were only 15 minutes each, so which is a very short time frame to really get into these layered stories and all of that. So I think that's where I felt the show fell down a bit, was the format didn't allow for the writers and the creators to really flesh out the stories. And I think, as you pointed out, Robyn, having that internalized ableism, or that ableism shown on screen is great for us who sort of understand what ableism is. However, if you're someone watching it and you don't have a good understanding of what ableism is, you may see it and be like, oh, he's trying to hide it because it's something that he should be ashamed of. And we're like, well, no, like, he's actually saying the opposite, but you have to, I guess, have a bit of an understanding to understand that point that he's making. So I think if they do go for a second, or they are going for a second season, and if they are going for longer episodes, I hope that there's a bit more contrast in there, a bit more context provided for audiences to better understand what is going on in his world and the point he's trying to make.
Otherwise, we'll just keep doing what we're doing. And we'll just tell everyone what's going on.
Perfect.
It'd be really good to have Ryan on, actually. That would be quite interesting.
Yeah, that was Ryan, call us.
I think I had like a bit of like a internal argument with myself about stuff, because I was like, oh, that's a little bit like not great. But then I was like, but he's controlling the narrative. Like, he's controlling his own narrative.
It's his experience.
He's also trying to be like as honest as possible, I think, to be educational as well. Like, that was my interpretation of it anyway. So I was kind of like, no, I don't think I can criticize that, because that's his real experience and that's his real, thought process, or that's actually something that happened. So, the one for me that sticks out is the time when he goes on a date with someone and he basically said, I can do better than someone who's deaf. And I was like, that's not great. But then I think, again, on that flip side, it shows that, like, 1, people with disability can be ableist, and 2, we can sometimes just be assholes. Like, it just shows that we're not like just disabled people. Like, we are people with our own shit going on, and our own prejudices going on. Yeah, exactly. Right, I think we've rambled on enough about Special. It's time to give our scores. So for all of you at home, we have come up with this fake scoring system, so don't try and Google it or anything. It's not real. There's pretty much no structure to it. It's just our own beliefs, which, probably there's a structure to that. But anyway, it's called the Inclusive Disability Representation Scale. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I think it explains itself. It's basically just how inclusive we think the representation was in this particular piece of media, which today is Special. So Steph, on the IDR scale, what did you give Special out of 5?
So I gave it a 4 out of 5 for the reasons that we kind of already talked about. I think the format let it down a little bit, and whether that was like restrictions from Netflix or funding or whatever it was. So I'm really looking forward to what they can do in the second season, because I think that's going to be the story that I'm really excited for, sort of where he's flourishing as his true self and really more comfortable with who he is. So I think that's the story that I'm really looking forward to, and it'll be the great follow-on from season 1.
Yes, he's out of the disability closet, so hopefully
we
get some more in-depth...
Living his best life.
Yeah, like us. Robyn?
Yeah, I felt like this was almost perfect. Again, just really looking forward to that second season, what they can do, and just sort of seeing Ryan, like you said, living his best life, just shining as a beautiful disabled man. But I gave it 4.5, so I was a little bit more gracious, perhaps.
Twins! I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 as well. Twinsies. Amazing.
I'm always going to be the harsh one.
Yeah. We have to have one.
Yeah, I'm not that person. It's okay.
Yes! Robyn and I are like good cops, and Steph can be the bad cop. No, and very similar reasons. I think, there wasn't enough almost time in each episode for those complex conversations to happen. So, you know, that internalized ableism, in my mind, I was like, oh, would like a non-disabled person who might not be as educated about this misconstrue this and think that this is like an okay thing to do or say? Yeah. Whereas, you know, in the future episodes, I also hope that like the character of Ryan, whether it's real or not, actually connects with some other people with disability and maybe the disabled community as a whole. But that was me. So a 4, 4.5, 4.5. That's pretty good to start with. I didn't want to start on a negative note, so that's why we started with special. We also wanted to start with something that was, you know, starred and directed by a person with disability, and produced by a person with disability, I mean, so that we could set the bar, I guess. So 4.5 is pretty good. There'll definitely be some negative stuff. Yeah, there'll be just some negative stuff coming up though. I know on the schedule we've got the movie Me Before You coming, so that's probably going to get ripped to shreds, I'd imagine. But that's
potentially.
We want to know from you guys at home what you thought of special, and we want you to tell us each week what your scores are on the made up inclusive disability representation scale. So jump onto our socials. If you literally just search Reframed Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, you'll be able to find us. And if email's better for you, you can email us at hello@reframedpodcast.com. And just tell us what your score was for special. Tell us if you had any like experiences you felt was similar, if you agreed with us, disagreed with us, all of the things. We want to know what you think about this, and we want some like good conversation happening, because the whole point of this podcast is to reframe how people think about disability and reframe how we're represented as well. So to do that, we need you to come on board and be our reframers. You're like helping us to do this, and we want you to be involved. So anyway, enough from me. Thank you so much, Steph and Robyn, and we will see you all next time. Bye.